Welcome back to The Grind. In this video, we are going to talk about how to use Warlock. Warlock is an incredibly useful champion to have in your roster. He has so much utility and his immunities are amazing. He is immune to Cold Snap and Frostbite, but also immune to Poisoned and Bleed effects, which makes him extremely useful in a lot of the challenging paths that cause bleed, poison, or even against the annoying Iceman. And there are so many nodes and champions that cause these debuffs, whether or not you're playing story mode, event quests, or even Alliance Quest and Alliance War. In addition to that, he also has a permanent armor up buff that reduces damage taken, and while the buff is up, you cannot take critical hits from special attacks, which is also very useful. If the armor buff is broken, it will return in 10 seconds. This persistent armor up also makes him a perfect counter for Havoc, because while you have an armor up, you will not take damage from his plasma charges exploding. But this is only the beginning. Before we get into his special attacks and discuss more of his utility, I wanted to highlight how Warlock is very easy to do shallow evades against champions, allowing you to get more ins against champions that you can't or don't want to parry or block against. And this is because his light attack has longer reach than most champions do, making it much easier to hit even if you evade further away than you might have to with other champions. But Warlock has even more utility. Warlock builds up passive virus debuffs by building up these yellow charges. Each block gives 1, and if it's well timed, like a parry, you get an additional 3. Also, you get a single charge for every contact you make with the opponent, whether they are attacking you or you are attacking them. Every time you reach 20 stacks, it converts to a passive virus debuff, which blocks 100% of healing, but also decreases the opponent's offensive ability accuracy by 30%. And every time they would gain health, he also power drains them by 5% over 0.5 seconds. And if he has his awakened ability, every heal triggers a passive degeneration debuff, which is also extremely handy to have. And finally, every non-contact basic attack that he's hit with drains 10% of their current power, which is very useful to help with power control, but also against Havoc, because every time you drain his power, he loses all his plasma charges. And every time you drain power, you also apply a degeneration debuff, which is why you degenerate when opponents trigger a heal, because the heal triggers power drain and the power drain triggers the degeneration damage, which adds up over the course of the fight. And now we're going to go into his attacks and special attacks, which surprisingly also adds even more utility. So you can see building up those virus charges. Once we hit 20, it converts into a virus passive debuff. Now, even though this fight will not have any regeneration, we can still use these with our special attacks. Now, the second special attack applies 2 armor breaks on activation and is the main source of damage from Warlock. Also, the last hit of the second special attack refreshes one of the virus passives as well as the 2 armor breaks, allowing you to have increased damage even after the second special attack ends. The first special attack applies a shock debuff and drains power based on how many virus charges you had, each one draining 25% of the opponent's max power over 5.5 seconds. However, it is important to remember that this does remove the infections, so if your opponent is going to be healing, you want to avoid consuming those infections, otherwise you will not be able to block their healing. Now, the third special attack does a couple things, also dependent on the number of infections that you have applied. One of the things is it heals Warlock for about 4% for every infection that is currently on the opponent. The other thing is not dependent on infections, but it burns 100% of the opponent's power over 5.5 seconds and deals power burn damage dependent on how much power is burned. And again, the signature ability will allow degeneration damage while the opponent is being power burned. Warlock's heavy attacks do fairly good damage as well as apply a bleed. So if you have deep wounds, this will make the bleed even more effective. So Warlock is also very useful in matchups where bleed is important or beneficial. In addition to that, the new Cavalier event difficulty has nodes where you need to have 3 debuffs active before you will deal damage, and you can achieve this in a couple ways. ways. 1 bleed and then applying the special 2 will get you 2 armor breaks so that the entire special 2 does damage, plus the armor breaks stick around for a while, so another bleed after the special 2 will allow you to continue to deal damage. Alternatively, if they don't armor break but can be bled, you can just continue to heavy attack and stack up multiple bleeds. You can get 3 bleeds at once, but even just with 2 bleeds and a parry, you will get damage off of your heavy attacks, so you can continue to deal damage in multiple ways against those nodes. You can also use the special 1 to apply shock debuffs for extra debuffs, or in matchups where they have shock vulnerability. Now sure, Warlock's overall damage potential is not the best in the game, but it's actually pretty good, and the utility that he offers allows you to get through so many challenging fights throughout Act 6, as well as the event quests and even Alliance quests and Alliance War. He was very effective against Act 6 Sinister, as well as all the paths that apply bleed or poison, or the really buffed up Havocs and Icemen that are on some of the challenging paths. I've also heard that he remains to be extremely useful throughout Act 6.3 and 6.4 with several challenging bosses and nodes along some of the more difficult paths. So how you play Warlock depends on the situation and the match you are in, whether you want to stack bleeds with your heavy attack, or if you want to just go for special attack 2 to add up those infections and get those armor breaks for bonus damage, or if you're low on health and you want to throw off a special 3 to get back a little bit of that health based on the infections that you've accumulated. The special 3 can also be useful against tough power gain matchups where you can save the 3rd special attack and use if you happen to get your opponent to 3 full bars of power. You can also use the special 1 when you need it if the opponent is gaining power as well. Warlock is such a versatile champion with the ability to drain power, completely block, heal, as well as apply various debuffs, and he has made a huge impact to my roster, and I hope that this video helps you to be able to understand and use Warlock a little bit better. Let me know in the comments if there's something else that I didn't discuss or something else that you use Warlock for that I failed to mention. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you in the next video.